Have you ever watched the very person you gave your whole life to suddenly become the stranger who destroyed you? That was my story. My name is Emily Carter, and if you stay with me till the end, you'll understand how betrayal can break a woman, but also how that same pain can rebuild her into something stronger than anyone imagined. When I first met Mark, he was nobody. Just a young man with a big dream of becoming a lawyer. I was fresh out of college, working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. He had charm, confidence, and a smile that promised the world. I believed in him. More than that, I invested everything in him. I worked long hours as a receptionist during the day and waited tables at night so he could go to law school. Rent, food, tuition bills, I carried it all. When Mark struggled, I reminded him of his brilliance. When he doubted himself, I became his cheerleader. People thought I was crazy for sacrificing so much, but I thought I was building a future for us, for our family. And for a while it looked like all that sacrifice was paying off. Mark graduated, passed the bar, and soon after landed a job at a prestigious law firm. I was proud to be his wife, proud to be the woman who stood behind him. I thought we were a team. But looking back now, I realized that was the beginning of my downfall. The first signs of betrayal were small, almost invisible. Mark became busier, working late nights at the office. He'd say things like, "You wouldn't understand, Emily. It's complicated." Or he'd brush me off when I asked about his cases. I assumed it was the stress of building his career, so I gave him space. After all, hadn't I always been patient? Then came the nights he didn't come home at all. The excuses rolled in like clockwork: late client meeting, big case prep, networking dinner. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me began to ache with doubt. Still, I stayed silent, convincing myself that loyalty meant trust. Until the night I found Claire. It was a rainy Friday. I decided to surprise Mark with dinner at his office. I thought maybe he was too stressed, maybe he needed a reminder of how much I cared. I carried his favorite meal, heart racing with excitement. But when I opened the door to his office, what I saw made the tray crash from my hands. Claire, his secretary, sitting on his desk, his lips on hers, their laughter cutting through me like glass. Mark froze when he saw me. Claire slid off the desk, adjusting her skirt, her face smug with victory. And me? I stood there, shaking, humiliated, the woman who had given up her own dreams for this man who now threw it all away for a cheap affair. "Emily, it's not what it looks like," he stammered. But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. That night marked the death of the Emily I used to be. The betrayal didn't stop there. Mark didn't just cheat on me, he schemed against me. Weeks later, divorce papers arrived. I was blindsided, but what crushed me wasn't just his betrayal, it was his cruelty. He had drained our savings. Not overnight, no. Mark was smarter than that. He had been moving money bit by bit into hidden accounts long before I caught him. By the time I realized, everything was gone. And then came the custody battle. I thought I'd at least have Ethan, our sweet boy, the light of my life. But Mark, with his expensive lawyers and fabricated stories, painted me as unstable. He even had people, his so-called friends, even a crooked therapist, testify that I was too depressed to be a good mother. Me. The same woman who had held our family together while he chased his dreams. The judge gave Mark temporary custody. I got visitation. My heart broke the day Ethan looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked, "Mommy, why can't I stay with you?" I had no answer. Only tears. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I went from living in our beautiful family home to a tiny one-bedroom apartment. From being a wife and mother to feeling like a stranger to my own child. There were nights I couldn't eat, nights I cried myself to sleep, nights I wondered if life was worth living at all. But somewhere in the middle of that despair, something shifted. I remembered who I was before Mark. Strong, determined, resilient. I had carried him when he was nothing, and if I could do that, I could rebuild myself. Not for him. Not even for me. But for Ethan. My boy needed a mother who would fight, not one who would crumble. So I fought. I got a job as a nurse's assistant. The hours were brutal, overnight shifts that left me drained, but I saved every penny. I took classes on the side, working toward my nursing license. I read books about business, management, finance, anything that could prepare me for more. For years, I worked and studied, slept on buses, ate instant noodles, and sacrificed. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt. 5 years later, I opened my own small healthcare staffing agency. It wasn't glamorous at first. Just me, a rented office, and 2 clients. But word spread. My dedication and honesty stood out in an industry filled with shortcuts. Clients trusted me. Employees respected me. The business grew. And then, fate delivered me the weapon I never saw coming. One day, while negotiating a contract with a new hospital, I met a man named Richard. He was bitter, angry, and suspicious of lawyers. When I asked why, he leaned back and sneered, "Because of your ex-husband, Mark Carter." My heart skipped. Richard had been one of Mark's clients. Mark had cheated him, stolen from him, lied to him, destroyed his case. And Richard had proof. Documents. Emails. Records. He slid the folder across the table and said, "Do with this what you will. That man ruined my life. Maybe you can ruin his." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. It was all there. Evidence of fraud, perjury, financial crimes. Enough to end his career. I didn't act immediately. No, I waited. I watched as Mark's law firm grew, as his arrogance soared. I watched as Claire clung to him, flaunting their relationship like a prize. And I smiled because I knew the storm I was about to unleash. When the time was right, I handed the evidence to the authorities. Quietly. Strategically. I didn't want drama, I wanted destruction. And oh, it came. Investigations opened. Clients pulled out. His partners turned on him. Debt piled high. And then, in his darkest hour, Claire abandoned him. Not with tears, but with greed. She took what she could, money, jewelry, even contacts, and disappeared. Mark was left alone. A man who once stood on top of the world, now drowning. But the sweetest part? The house. Our family home. The place where I once cried myself to sleep. Mark, desperate for cash, was forced to put it on the market. Through an agent, I bought it back. And on moving day, when Mark arrived to hand over the keys, his face turned pale as he realized who the new owner was. "Emily," he whispered. I stood tall, my son by my side, my business thriving, my life whole again. "You tried to destroy me, Mark," I said calmly, "but you only made me stronger." His eyes filled with regret, but it was too late. The man who betrayed me was now nothing more than a ghost of his former self. And me? I was free. But freedom wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because I wasn't done yet. I wanted justice. Not just for myself, but for every woman who had ever been betrayed, humiliated, and discarded like trash. I wanted the world to see what happens when you push a woman too far. And as I looked at Mark standing on my doorstep, defeated, broken, I realized my revenge was only just beginning. It felt strange standing in front of the mirror that night. The woman staring back at me was no longer the same Emily who once cried herself to sleep over Mark's betrayal. Her hair was fuller, her shoulders stood taller, and her eyes, though scarred with memory, now carried fire. For the first time in years, I didn't just see survival in my reflection. I saw power. But let me take you back, because power doesn't come overnight. It comes through every bruise, every humiliation, every night you choose not to give up. And my journey to revenge was paved with them. At first, it was pure survival. I worked long nights at the hospital as a nursing assistant. The pay was barely enough, but at least Ethan and I had food on the table. I'd put him to bed, whispering promises I wasn't even sure I could keep. "Mommy's going to make things better, baby. I promise." But when the apartment lights went off, I'd cry into my pillow, muffling the sobs so he wouldn't hear. The lowest blow came at his school recital. I had saved up for weeks just to buy him a little shirt and tie so he wouldn't feel out of place. But when I walked into the auditorium, my heart froze. Claire was there. On her wrist gleamed the very bracelet I had pawned years ago to buy Mark his first suit for job interviews. She sat beside Mark like she belonged to the life I built. And Mark, he looked at me, smirked, and whispered something into her ear that made her laugh. That night I broke down completely. But in that darkness, something inside me snapped. I decided tears would no longer be my language. From then on, I lived with tunnel vision. I enrolled in online nursing courses during the day, studied on my lunch breaks, and worked my body to the bone. The exhaustion was unbearable, but every time I looked at Ethan's face, it gave me strength. Years passed. Slowly I built myself up. I became a registered nurse, then started freelancing as a caregiver. With each paycheck I saved, cutting corners ruthlessly. And finally, I dared to dream bigger. I launched a small healthcare staffing agency. At first, it was just me juggling shifts and paperwork in a tiny rented office. But word spread about my honesty and dedication. Hospitals began calling. Nurses wanted placements. My business grew slowly, painfully, but steadily. I wasn't rich, not yet. But for the first time since the divorce, I wasn't drowning. And then fate delivered the key to my revenge. One afternoon, I was meeting a new client, an older man named Mr. Dawson. He had a sharp gaze, the kind of man who carried decades of bitterness in his wrinkles. As we talked business, he suddenly studied me carefully. "You're Mark Reynolds' ex-wife, aren't you?" he asked. My chest tightened. "Yes." "Why?" His lips curled into something between pity and satisfaction. "That man ruined me. Hired him to represent my company. Promised me miracles. Instead, he stole from me, cut corners, and left me in financial ruin." I blinked. You have proof?" He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "I kept everything. Emails, contracts, signed documents. I've been waiting for the day someone would make him pay." When he handed me that thick envelope, my hands trembled. It was the kind of evidence that could bury Mark's career. But I didn't strike yet. No. Revenge is an art, and timing is everything. I kept smiling in public, pretending his cruelty no longer touched me. All the while, I built my case quietly. More clients came forward. More stories of fraud. Piece by piece, I assembled the puzzle. And Mark? Oh, he thrived in arrogance. He threw lavish parties, dined in the finest places with Claire on his arm, and continued to paint me as the bitter, unstable ex-wife. But pride blinds men like him. He never once suspected that the woman he left broken was building the fire that would burn his empire down. The night of his grandest party was when I made my move. He was celebrating the expansion of his law firm, inviting judges, partners, and wealthy friends. The press was there, flashing cameras as if he were royalty. I stood across the street in the shadows, clutching the folder that carried his death sentence. My heart pounded. My palms sweated. I thought about every humiliation, every tear, every whisper behind my back. And then I thought about Ethan, about the future I wanted to give him. I turned and walked into the district attorney's office, sliding the evidence across the desk. "This," I whispered, "is the truth about Mark Reynolds." The storm didn't hit immediately. At first, Mark carried on as usual. But within weeks, whispers began. Clients pulled out. Investigators appeared at his office. Reporters circled. His partners started to distance themselves, each one abandoning ship to save their own skin. I'll never forget the look on his face the first time I saw him stumble out of court, his perfect hair disheveled, his suit rumpled. Gone was the smugness. For the first time he looked small. And then came the greatest betrayal of all, not mine but Claire's. When the heat intensified, Claire didn't stand beside him. No. She vanished, quietly moving out, taking jewelry, money, even one of his cars. He came home to an empty closet and a note. "I can't go down with you." The man who once humiliated me with her was now humiliated by her. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. Not until the courtroom gave me justice. This time, I walked in not as the timid, penniless woman from years ago, but as Emily Carter, the owner of a thriving staffing agency, with a team of lawyers by my side. Mark sat across the table, gaunt and exhausted. His eyes darted nervously as my attorney laid out the truth. The hidden accounts, the false witnesses, the fraud, the manipulation. Document after document stripped him bare. The judge's voice was steady, almost merciless. Custody is hereby granted fully to the mother, Emily Carter. The father, Mr. Reynolds, is deemed unfit until further notice. Tears blurred my vision as Ethan ran into my arms. For years I had dreamed of this moment, and now it was real. Mark sat slumped, his face pale, his empire in ruins. But fate wasn't done with him yet. Months later, I received a call from my realtor. "Emily, you're not going to believe this. The Reynolds house just went up for sale. Legal debts, foreclosure, the whole package. Interested?" My heart skipped. That house, the one he threw me out of, the one where I had poured my sweat and love, the walls that once held my humiliation. "Yes," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Buy it. Don't tell him it's me." Moving day arrived like a scene from a movie. Mark stood in the driveway, pale and broken, directing movers with the little pride he had left. And then his eyes lifted and saw me walking toward the house, Ethan holding my hand. His face drained of color. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I smiled softly. "I'm moving home." He staggered back, his lips trembling. No, you can't. This is mine." "Not anymore." I handed him the papers. His own signature of sale stared back at him. He sank onto the steps, burying his face in his hands. And then the begging began. "Please, Emily, forgive me. I lost everything. I have no one." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I once loved, who betrayed me, humiliated me, tried to destroy me. And now, he was just a shell. "Mark," I whispered, "you betrayed me, humiliated me, and tried to destroy me. But thank you. Because without your cruelty, I would have never found my strength." That night, Ethan and I walked into our home together. But this time, it wasn't a house of sorrow, it was a house of victory. I didn't just get revenge. I got my life back, my dignity, my freedom. And Mark? He was left broken, forgotten, and alone. What are your thoughts on this story? Please leave your comments and please subscribe, like, and share this story.